Hi, both. Thanks for joining us today on our Business Gurus channel, where we will be discussing key business topics to help students grasp the most important elements of their course in preparation for their exams and future career. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something huge, something that's really reshaping business. Corporate environmental action.
Yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it? ESG, corporate responsibility. It's a lot to sift through.
Exactly. So much noise. Our mission today is uh, pretty straightforward. Cut through that buzz. We want to get right to the core ideas and the real strategies companies are using for environmental action based on the sources you sent over.
That's right. And honestly, whether you're looking at company reports, getting ready for a meeting, or just trying to understand the claims being made, well, knowing how ethics, business, and the environment connect is, frankly, essential now.
Absolutely. It's fundamental.
It really defines that modern competitive edge, I think.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're thinking three main parts. First, let's nail down what we even mean by environmental considerations.
Good starting point.
Second, we'll map out the key tensions, those four terms the sources highlight that frame all these
Yes,
decisions.
flying concepts, yeah.
Yeah. And third, we'll look at some concrete examples, how companies like Patagonia and IKEA are actually putting this stuff into practice, because their approaches are really different. All right, let's unpack this, starting with basics. When we talk about environmental considerations for a company, what are we actually aiming for? What's the goal, according to the sources?
Well, the core objective, it seems simple on the surface, is minimizing damage to the planet.
Minimizing damage.
But it's meant to be, proactive,
Yeah.
measurable. The sources specifically call out three big areas of action.
Which are?
Number one, actively reducing pollution across the board in everything they do.
Okay, pollution reduction.
Number two, using sustainable materials. So thinking about where stuff comes from.
Where are the inputs?
And third, strategically lowering the company's overall carbon footprint, their total impact.
Pollution, materials, footprint. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes sense as sort of buckets of action. But what's really interesting is the sources don't just list actions. They give us this framework for how companies grapple with these choices. They talk about four specific concepts that create the tension here: ethics, environment trade-offs, and pressure groups. Let's spend a minute on those because, well, they seem crucial.
They really are. And putting those terms out there right away tells us this isn't just some technical problem to solve.
It's not just engineering.
No, not at all. It starts with ethics. The fundamental moral choice a company makes about prioritizing the planet's health, sometimes even when it might hit the short-term bottom line.
So it's about deciding what matters most, fundamentally.
Exactly. That's the baseline, setting the priority.
I guess once you've made that ethical call, that's when the hard part starts, the trade-offs. Because doing the sustainable thing, well, it often costs more, or it's just harder logistically, right?
Precisely. That's the core conflict. You're constantly balancing profit margins against planetary impact.
Yeah.
The sources really emphasize that the classic trade-off is that upfront cost.
Right.
The money and time needed to switch to sustainable stuff versus just using the cheaper, maybe less green option that boosts profits now. So for a big public company especially, deciding to spend, say, 20% more on recycled materials, that takes real ethical commitment to push past the easy financial win.
Which implies they're not making these tough calls in like a quiet room by themselves. There has to be some push. Yeah. That brings us to pressure groups. We often think, Greenpeace or whoever, but the sources suggest it's broader. Who's applying this pressure that forces companies to make these costly ethical trade-offs real?
Yeah, it's a much wider net than just the environmental NGOs, though they're important, of course.
Okay.
The sources point to three other big forces. First, you've got regulators, government setting rules, mandatory limits. That's the stick, basically.
Compliance, got it.
Second, you have investors. Increasingly powerful investor groups, shareholders, looking very closely at ESG performance. That's the money talking, financial leverage.
Right, the ESG scores.
And third, crucially, you have us, consumers. Our choices, what we buy, where we spend our money, that can reward or punish a company almost instantly.
So it's regulators, investors, and customers.
Exactly. These groups, internal and external, they're the ones turning up the volume on those difficult trade-offs, making them unavoidable.
Okay, that framework makes sense. You've got the ethics setting the direction, the pressure groups applying force, and the company navigating the inevitable trade-offs.
That's a good way to put it.
So now that we've got the definitions and the sort of conceptual map,
Right.
let's get concrete. How does this actually play out? The sources gave us two really distinct, powerful examples, Patagonia and IKEA.
Yeah, two great case studies. Let's start with Patagonia. They're almost legendary now, aren't they? A textbook example because their whole approach is designed to be, well, disruptive.
How so?
They weave environmental thinking into everything, not just the product itself, but the whole relationship with the customer. It goes way beyond just, putting out a recycling bin.
Okay, tell us more. What are the specifics? You mentioned something radical, something that seems to go against basic retail logic.
It really does. So their strategy has two main parts. First, on the making things side, they use a lot of recycled materials. The sources mentioned their jackets and fleeces specifically. That's becoming more common, maybe?
Right, using recycled content.
But the second part, that's the disruptive bit. They actively encourage and support the repair of old clothing. They offer really strong warranties and repair services.
Hang on. They tell people not to buy a new jacket, but to fix their old one.
Pretty much.
That sounds completely counter to how retail normally works. Grow sales, sell more units. Did the sources explain how they make that work financially? That seems like a massive ethical trade-off right there in action.
It's a huge trade-off, absolutely. The sources suggest Patagonia basically accepts lower sales volume in the short term. They take that hit.
Okay.
Why? In exchange for two other things. Incredible long-term customer loyalty and massive brand value. People trust them. They're seen as authentic, ethical leaders.
So it's an investment.
Exactly. An investment in the customer relationship and their reputation. They can charge a premium price, and they count on customers sticking with them for years, decades even, not just chasing the next fast fashion trend. It completely flips the usual retail model.
Wow. That really shows what happens when strong ethics meet a smart, if unconventional, business strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot. IKEA, totally different beast, right? Huge scale, global presence.
Absolutely. If Patagonia is about the product's life and the user relationship, IKEA's challenge is more about the sheer volume and the basic ingredients of their products, particularly wood.
Given their size and what they sell, yeah, wood must be massive for them. So what are their main commitments?
Two big ones highlighted. First, a huge effort in their supply chain to make sure the vast majority of their wood, the heart of their business, comes from sustainably managed forests.
Okay, that sounds like a major operational undertaking. And expensive.
Oh, definitely. A massive trade-off requiring global oversight. Then second, they've set this really big future goal. A public promise to make all of their products using only renewable or recycled materials by 2030.
All products by 2030. That's
Yes,
ambitious.
very.
The sources seemed impressed by the goal, but I gotta ask, is setting a target that far out, like 2030, a bit like, green wishing? Is it just kicking the can down the road without real accountability now? Did the sources touch on that skepticism?
That's a really fair question, and yeah, the sources did acknowledge that skepticism exists.
Okay.
But they also pointed out that IKEA isn't just waiting. They're huge investments right now in sustainable forestry. And the fact that they're already redesigning products to use recycled materials today, that suggests the commitment is real and underway.
So the 2030 date isn't the start, it's the finish line.
Exactly. It marks the planned completion date for a massive systemic overhaul that they're already deep into. They're accepting those financial trade-offs now to build the systems they need for that future state. It's not just talk.
Okay, that clarifies things. So what we're seeing here are two really different ways to hit that same core goal. Minimizing damage. Patagonia is going after product lifespan, waste reduction, trying to make things last, building loyalty.
Right.
IKEA, because of its scale and product type, is tackling it through massive changes in where its materials come from, setting these big future system-wide goals, relying on overhauling their whole supply chain.
That's a great comparison, yeah. Both are definitely making tough trade-offs like we talked about, but using very different levers, different business tactics.
Patagonia's feels more personal, like an ethical connection with the customer.
I think so. Well, IKEA's is more of a deep, structural, almost engineering challenge, changing the inputs globally.
So bringing this all together, what's the big takeaway for you listening to this? It's not just that being green is a trend, right? It's about how companies are navigating these deep structural tensions constantly.
Exactly. And if we circle back to those key terms from the start, these examples just bring them to life. Well, you see the pressure groups, customers, investors pushing for change. That influences the company's stated ethics.
Right.
And that forces them into making these incredibly difficult trade-offs. Patagonia sacrifices short-term sales volume for that long-term ethical reputation. IKEA accepts huge supply chain complexity and cost for systemic material reform. It all connects.
It really does. The ethics drive the need to deal with pressure, which forces the trade-offs. Okay, so the challenge is clearly huge, which leaves us and you with a really interesting question to think about after this deep dive.
Yeah, chew on this one. We've seen two models. Patagonia's kind of micro focus on repair, longevity, customer connection, and IKEA's macro focus on hitting that 2030 goal for all materials, changing massive global supply chains.
Two very different strategies.
So the question is, which approach do you think will ultimately have the bigger impact? Not just for them, but maybe as a model for the rest of the global economy. Is it the deep product lifecycle change or the massive systemic materials overhaul?
Which one is more replicable, maybe, or more powerful in the long run?
Exactly. That's the heart of the strategic trade-off, isn't it? It's not just about wanting to do good, it's about picking the most effective, most impactful way to actually change how we make and use things, something to really mull over.
Thanks to both of you for joining us today. You've been listening to the Business Gurus. Let's now hand it over to you. What further questions do you have based on what we've discussed so far? Leave a comment and we'll get back to you right away. If you haven't already, hit that follow for more business tips.